Hello and welcome to Loom the History. Today we will be looking at an institution that wreaked havoc, created chaos, and resulted in numerous deaths. An institution that was driven to control belief in medieval time. An institution that failed in doing so. Today we will be looking at the infamous Spanish Inquisition. The Inquisition did not begin in Spain. It began centuries earlier in scattered villages, contested sermons, and among a growing fear that Christian unity itself was under threat. Long before 1478, the medieval church was already learning how to investigate belief, extract confessions, and to punish dissent. And at the center of all this transformation was a group churchmen like to call the Cathars. To understand the Spanish Inquisition, we must first understand who the Cathars were and how things got out of control. Therefore, we must begin in 10th century in Bulgaria. Here, sources attest that Bogomil movement, an Eastern Christian tradition built on dualism, the belief that reality was divided into a good spiritual principle and an evil lesser principle that tied to the material world. However, historians stress that this was not a single export to the West, but a durable tradition that was capable of transmitting ideas, texts, and entire institutions across regions over time. This Eastern current, and the ones that followed after it, would later shape how Western churchmen understood and therefore feared heresy. By the mid-1100s, the church authorities in southern France and regions such as Occitania, in cities such as Toulouse, Albi, Carcassonne, and parallelly in northern Italy in cities such as Tuscany, Bologna, Verona, and Milan, increasingly labeled dissident Christians, those who did not conform to Christian beliefs, as Catharis, Patarini, or Publicani. And while the terminologies were fluid and polemical, the modern scholars still debate whether a single organized Cathar church ever existed, or whether inquisitors later standardized diverse local beliefs into one category. But what mattered was the perception that resulted in church authorities to believe that they now faced a systemic theological challenge. The same perception made Cathars dangerous, and across regions, Cathars were considered to have common beliefs, such as strong dualist beliefs that rejected the goodness of material world. People were also held to have ascetic ideas, especially among the elites in the Cathars, and especially the sharp critique of the wealth and the power of the institutional church. All these ideas struck at church's authorities over sacrament, hierarchy, and most importantly, salvation itself. Disagreements in the church's eyes and the leaders became now, more than ever, an existential threat. And to deal with this threat, the church chose a systemic repression. And as a result, on November 4th in 1184 in Verona, the policy now known as ad abolendam made a turning point. It condemned heretic groups, including those called Cathars, and demanded regular organized actions against them and their supporters. This was no longer about occasional punishment, it was more about a designed systemic repression, a legal foundation for investigation of belief and enforcement of punishment. In the early 1200s, repression escalated in Languedoc in southern France. Under Pope Innocent III, anti-heresy campaigns intensified and they culminated in crusading violence against dissident regions. But force alone was not sufficient. The church needed something more, something permanent, and what came as a solution was a mix of court proceedings, trials, investigations, and soon after, followed by punishments. What remained now was to term this all under one label. The solution had arrived in 1231. Pope Gregory IX authorized Dominican friars to formally examine and prosecute heresy in southern France and northern Italy, and this movement is widely treated as the foundation of medieval or papal inquisitions. Heresy was now subject to routine investigations, interrogations, and record keeping. It was more of a bureaucratic system of belief and control. In 1244, at Montségur, mass burning followed the fall of Cathars' stronghold, though the dissidents continued afterwards. Montségur became a symbolic endpoint, proof in modern popular memory that resistance could be annihilated. Although the Inquisition model was now firmly established, dissidents continued. The Church's papal inquisitorial mindset was now gaining momentum. Extraction of testimonies and condemnation based on error was now a more prevalent idea than previously thought. Christians in Europe had already started to pressure Jews and Muslims to either convert or face consequences. For example, in Paris, after previous papal complaints about the Talmud, the campaign culminated in the destruction of Jewish books. Sources tied to these Paris proceedings described the push to seize and destroy the Talmud, with the majority of burning traditionally placed around 1244 under King Louis IX in great detail. This, however, wasn't an isolated incident. In crown lands of Aragon, religious pressure also took the form of stage-proof debates. In Barcelona, in 1263, the famous disputation pitted the Jewish scholar Moses Nachmanides against the convert Dominican Pablo Cristiani. Under royal oversight, an event modern scholars treat closer to an inquisitorial prosecution rather than a free debate. While in Castile, Muslim communities living under new Christian rule faced tightening control. A major flashpoint was 1264 to 1266, where the uprising in Morica, after which Muslims were expelled or relocated or placed under harsher constraints. It was a reminder that non-Christians could be managed by police, policy, force, and resettlement without even a single court proceeding Europe-wide. But this was just the beginning. By 1290, rulers began choosing removal of non-Christians over an uneasy coexistence. For example, in England, the Crown issued orders culminating in expulsion of Jews in a decisive step taken on July 18, 1290 under King Edward I. Whereas in France, Philip IV, also known as Philip the Fair, expelled Jews in 1306, seizing any property they had and any claim to the property or the wealth they could have had. On the other side, in southern France in 1320, the Pasteur, also known as Shepherd's Crusade, turned into a roaming violence that included attacks on Jews, showing how mass religious fervor could bypass courts entirely and still follow the era's purification logic. Then came the Black Death between 1348 and 1351, and with it, a wave of scapegoating. Across many towns in Holy Roman Empire and the neighboring regions, Jews were accused of crimes like well poisoning and pogrom eruptions. Modern scholars map this violence across Alsace and Swiss cities, and economic history research also documents the patterns of anti-Jewish persecution linked to plague and the panic. Importantly, even as Inquisition culture shaped Christian policies, Jews were generally not under the Inquisition as such unless offensive claims were true against them and they were dragged into jurisdiction. What followed afterwards was pure chaos and systemic oppression and systemic obsession over the Conversos. What started with Cathars in medieval Europe had now created an inquisitorial machine, and it was ready, and someone just needed to take control of it. And then came the dreadful summer of 1391. In the summer of 1391, the streets of Seville erupted. Heat, hunger, and anger boiled over as mobs surged through the Jewish quarters. Hundreds were killed. Those who survived faced an impossible choice: baptism or death. Within weeks, similar scenes played out across Cordoba, Valencia, Barcelona, and other major cities across Spain. Jewish communities were wiped out or scattered, and thousands suddenly became something new. Conversos, baptized Jews living as Christians across societies that no longer trusted them. From that moment, Spain's religious landscape was changed. Conversos rose to prominence in finance, government, and medicine. They were Christians in law, and yet many old neighbors, rivals, and preachers spread and whispered rumors that they were Jews in secret, a hidden fifth column within the church. Suspicion became a permanent shadow over this new class. By the mid 1400s, Spain was still a patchwork of faith and jurisdiction, and Jews, Muslims, and Christians lived side by side, and royal power were far from absolute. Civil wars, feuds among nobles, and economic distress was creating a very volatile mix. The kingdom was already fractured. Fear of hidden Jewish practices intensified each day, and Jews were blamed for almost everything that didn't go well. Just like in 1454, Jews were immediately blamed for death of a child in Valladolid, and confessions were extracted by torture. By 1459 and 1460, Fray Alonso de Espina's Fortalicium Fidei condemned Jews, Moors, and Conversos alike, strengthening what authors and historians like Henry Charles Lee called bitterness of race hatred that required little encouragement. The hostility culminated in Codina of Medina del Campo in 1464 and 65, in which King Henry IV and rebellious nobles demanded a sweeping episcopal inquisition to suppress Judaizing heresy. Though the plan faltered, sporadic persecutions did follow, most notably in 1467 when two conversos in Llerena were discovered performing Jewish rites and were burned alive the same day. In 1467 and again in 1473, anti-converso riots and killings rocked towns like Toledo, Ciudad Real, Cordoba, and Jaén. In Jaén, the converso constable of Castile, Miguel Lorenzo de Iranzo, was cut down at high altar as he tried to defend fellow New Christians. Historian Henry Kamen emphasizes that it was these political events, rather than any clearly proven underground Judaism, that ultimately brought the Inquisition into being. The stage was central and southern Castile, frontier lands of the old Christian-Muslim wars and home of many Spain's Jews and Conversos. In 1469, the marriage of Ferdinand of Aragon and Isabel of Castile created a powerful royal partnership. After Isabel's ascension in 1474, they launched a broad campaign to restore order, raising local police forces known as Hermandad, sending royal forces and governors to enforce justice and preventing, or pacifying at least. And at the same time, Isabel and Ferdinand personally protected many Jewish communities, intervening against hostile towns so they could continue to use Jewish financiers and doctors at court. Henry Kamen states that Isabel in 1477 declared that all Jews in her realm were her subjects and under her care and protection. But the Jewish question for them was not yet simply the story of expulsion. However, the issue of conversos, those who had crossed the religious line, was different. They were inside Christian societies, yet marked by origin and rumor. As social tensions grew, they became a convenient explanation for disorder. In this atmosphere, the monarchs requested a special inquisition to investigate Judaizing among conversos. As a result, on 1st November 1478, Pope Sixtus VI issued a bull authorizing the appointment of inquisitors in Castile, with the crucial detail that Ferdinand and Isabel could choose and dismiss them. At first, nothing seemed to happen, and for almost 2 years, no tribunals operated. The crown appeared to have been cautious, perhaps hoping that the leniency would work. But then, on September 27, 1480, the turning point arrived at Medina del Campo. Commissions were issued to two Dominican friars, Juan de San Martin and Miguel de Morillo, with Juan Ruiz de Medina as assessor or inquisitors. Kamen writes that with these appointments, the Spanish Inquisition came into definitive existence. The first stage was Seville, an Andalusian city with powerful converso families and a history of tension. And on 6 February 1481, the new tribunal staged its first auto de fe. 6 people were burned at stake with sermons preached by Fray Alonso de Hojeda, a triumph that would be short-lived, as he soon died afterwards due to plague. What began as a routine inquest into religious sincerity now had a public face, roaring flames, and processions of penitents, and an unmistakable message. Deviation from faith, or even being suspected of it, could cost you everything, even your life. The early years were chaotic. Papal complaints about abuse and local resistance in Aragon forced King Ferdinand to negotiate and maneuver. But in 1483, he secured a decisive victory, a bull on 17th October 1483 appointing the infamous, notorious Dominican friar Thomas de Torquemada as Inquisitor General for Aragon, Valencia, and Catalonia, adding to his authority in Castile, of course. For the first time, a single figure presided over Inquisition tribunals across Spanish crowns. A few years later, around 1488, the Inquisition gained its own central council, the Suprema, also known as the Royal Council of Inquisition, with Torquemada as its president. The integration of the Holy Office into the machine of royal government, coordinating tribunals in cities such as Seville, Cordoba, and Sociedad Real, wasn't enough. However, throughout the later 1400s and early 1500s, the Inquisition was most active against Conversos. Chroniclers claim that thousands were burned and tens of thousands reconciled under Edict of Grace. In the Diocese of Seville, one contemporary estimate spoke of more than 700 burned and over 5,000 reconciled between 1480 to 1488. By 1492, Spain reached another pivotal year. That year saw expulsion or forced conversion of its remaining Jews, the fall of Muslim Granada, and the discovery of Americas. 3 events that have books written on their own, and yet the Inquisition stood at the heart of a monarchy that now presented itself as militantly Catholic at home and newly global abroad. It's safe to say that these 3 events helped shape a more rigid Catholic Spanish identity. And then came the Alhambra Decree. In January 1492, the armies of Castile and Aragon entered Granada, ending nearly 8 centuries of Muslim rule in Iberia that started in 711. For Spanish monarchy, the fall of Granada appeared to signal divine favor and completion of religious unity. But within weeks, the sense of triumph would lead to one of the most consequential decisions in Spanish history. On 31st March 1492, while still in Granada, King Ferdinand of Aragon and Queen Isabel of Castile issued what is now known as the Alhambra Decree. The order required all practicing Jews in their realm to convert to Christianity or, within 4 months, leave Spain by 31st July 1492. The decree named Jews as its target, but its true concerns lay elsewhere. After 12 years of investigation, arrests, and trials, the Inquisition concluded that it had failed in stopping, as they put it at that time, the Conversos from undermining Christian unity and fueling heresy and practicing Judaism. Regional expulsion in 1480s had not solved the problems. According to royal correspondence, it was Inquisition itself that proposed total expulsion as the only remaining solution. At the time, Spain's Jewish population numbered just over 80,000. When the decree was announced, Jewish leaders petitioned the crown and even offered large sums of money to reverse the decision. This appeal was, however, rejected. The monarchy accepted the expulsion despite acknowledging that it would damage royal finances. The consequences were immediate and severe. Thousands sold homes and lands at desperate prices. Gold and silver could not be exported by those expelled. Families crowded onto unsafe ships while others fled overland to Portugal, North Africa, and Italy. Many died from diseases, violence, or shipwrecks. Facing these dangers, perhaps around half or 40,000 of Spain's Jews chose to conversion instead of exile, while 30 to 40% chose to remain in exile, with the remaining 10 to 20% being lost to history over time. Ironically, the decree did not eliminate the problem it was meant to solve. By forcing mass conversion, it expanded the population of Conversos, placing even more people under inquisitorial suspicion. Rather than ending religious anxiety, the Alhambra Decree shaped the Spanish Inquisition into a permanent institution, focused not just on belief, but now on ancestry. Over the 1500s, the target list of the Holy Office expanded. Protestants, mystics, alleged witches, and others could find themselves under scrutiny, and yet what really changed was not the level of terror, but the administration. In 1561, Inquisitor General Fernando de Valdez issued a new set of instructions. 81 clauses designed to standardize procedures, strengthen control by Suprema, and stabilize finances. Kamen notes that only with these instructions did an organized bureaucratic inquisition really take shape. Long after the main Converso crisis had passed, but a few decades later, another grand act of religious cleansing shaped the monarchy. Between 1609 and 1611, Spain expelled Moriscos, baptized descendants of its former Muslim population. But by 1700s, however, executions had become rare. During the combined reign of Charles III and Charles IV, only 4 people were burned during the inquisitorial process. The Inquisition increasingly acted as a political censor, hostile to Enlightenment ideas, and figures like Pablo de Olavide, whose work towards secularizing reforms, progressive thinking, and anti-clerical tendencies led to his persecution, dismissal from office, and subsequent downfall. This had become the new preferred method for the Inquisition rather than being a mass killer. But the French Revolution had a different idea. The French Revolution and Napoleon's armies pushed this aging institution to its final act. When the French forces installed Joseph I as king in 1808, one of their first decisions was to abolish the Holy Office on 4th December. Spanish liberal meetings at the Cortes of Cadiz followed suit in 1813, voting 90 to 60 in favor to abolish Inquisition. But the old force did not give up easily. When King Ferdinand VII returned in 1814, he restored the tribunal, though, as Kamen notes, more in name than in reality, the institution was far gone. It was effectively moribund. In 1820, a liberal revolution forced Ferdinand VII to abolish it once more. Even Rome, defending the principle that only the papacy could suppress a tribunal founded by papal bull, admitted that there was no reason to regret its disappearance. Yet sadly, the mentality outlived the institution, because in Valencia, schoolmaster Caetano Ripoll, who had become a deist while in prison in France, was arrested in 1824, accused of not taking his pupil to Mass and teaching them a non-Catholic formula of prayer. Simply put, he was teaching them to say, "Praise be to God," instead of Ave Maria Purisima. After a long trial, he was executed in 1826 by a successor tribunal, making him the last person in Spain to put to death for heresy. Finally, on 15 July 1834, the government of Queen Isabella II issued a decree of suppression. But by then, the Inquisition had long ceased to be a major force. The decree was largely a formality, but it drew a clear legal line under a story that had begun with a papal bull in 1478, and with the political anxieties of a monarchy that was struggling to control its subjects. When we talk about Spanish Inquisition, we're not just talking about a fearsome court and dark dungeon, or people being burned at stake, or people being tried for witchcraft randomly and thrown into a river. We're talking about something more complex. A tribunal born out of civil war, social envy, and the royal attempt to impose order. An institution that turned existing European inquisitorial traditions into a uniquely Spanish instrument, a body that over 3.5 centuries shifted from burning heretics to policing books and ideas, before it finally faded into political irrelevance. From the riots in 1391 to the decree in 1384, the Inquisition's story is a reminder of how easily fear, politics, and religion can be combined to build a machine of control, and how long its shadow can linger even after the fire has gone out. Thank you for watching.